Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. We are going to start a new topic today under the title of Meezan lecture series. As you would all recall, and I'm sure clearly remember, that this lecture series is based on Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi's book Meezan, which itself is his understanding of the contents of Islam. The topic that we are going to begin today is called the Framework of Islam, and it is the second preamble of his book. The reason that we will be studying this topic at this instance is that basically this is his own interpretation of the contents of Islam arranged in a structure, in a framework, and as such it represents his original contribution. Aside from his own complete interpretation of the contents of Islam arranged in a framework, we know that there are two other prominent interpretations, we can say, or frameworks that have been suggested by scholars. So one of them, the more famous one and the more predominant among Muslims, is the Tasawwuf framework, which is put forth by our Sufi scholars, and of course Ibn al-Arabi, Imam Ghazali, and later on Shah Waliullah. They can be called the champions of this version, or we can say this framework of Islam. Then we have a second framework of Islam which culminated in political Islam, and it started off with the what we can say as the jihad framework. The important people amongst this framework is Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, of course. He's the forerunner, he's perhaps the founder, and it culminated in Ustaz Abul Ala Maududi's own personality, who also further refined and took this whole framework to a new level. And this third framework, which is presented by Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi, he says and he claims that this is the framework which is the framework of the Sahaba or the Prophet, and he thinks that as far as the other two frameworks are concerned, they are absolutely flawed, and they need to be re-evaluated and reconstituted. So today we'll study how he has understood this whole framework and how he has arranged the contents of religion in the form of a structure. You will see that basically his framework of Islam consists of these 10 broad topics. Yes, we have some individual details that we will study, but broadly you can see these are the 10 structural topics, or in other words, these are the prominent points which actually demarcate what exactly Islam stands for: the essence of religion, definition of religion, contents of religion, prophets and messengers, purpose of divine books, the responsibility of inzar, Islam, which is the name of this religion, Iman, which is the inner aspect of religion. Then we have the objective of religion, and finally the 10th point is the correct religious attitude. So these 10 points, or these 10 commandments, if you can say, they make up the structure of religion, the framework of religion as understood by Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi. So now let us start with the first of these topics. The first of these topics, as you all know, is the essence of Islam, or the essence of religion to be precise, which is presented here. So in one word, Ustaz Ghamidi says that the Quranic term of ibadah, or worship, is the essence of religion, and it is in reality worship which the creator of this world desires of his servants and creatures. So you can see the words of the Quran are وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, and I created jinn and mankind only to worship me. Now, some explanation is in order, because generally it is thought that, what this verse means is that people have been created to pray and to fast and to do other worship rituals as far as God is concerned. But this is not what this verse is telling us. It's not saying that the Almighty has created jinn and mankind that they start observing these worship rituals. The word used here is liya'budun, and this word actually refers to the fact that at various instances in our times, in our lives, in our own routines, we have to regard ourselves to be God's creatures. We must regard ourselves to be God's servants who are humble to Him, and they have a status of being answerable to Him. They have a status of being meek, and not in any case think that they are absolutely not dependable on anyone. They are independent and they have their own status, which is not true. So basically the relationship between creatures and their God is that of servitude. So one word that can in essence describe our relationship with the Almighty, which is also the essence of religion. It's servitude, which means that we have to realize that God has created us as people who are going to serve His cause, as people who must not override this service, who must never think that they are individuals who are in charge of affairs, but basically they have to acknowledge the greatness of the Almighty, the exaltedness of the Almighty, and their own meekness and civility. At various instances in the Quran, it is mentioned very clearly that the Almighty, He has sent His messengers to inform people of this very reality. So you can see the very next verse, which is now displayed before you, is said, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولٍ أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. And we raised a messenger in each nation with the message, worship God and keep away from at-taghut. So the important thing here to realize is that this verse of Surah Nahl, which says that the Almighty has asked us to be in servitude to Him, it actually means that people are asked on the one hand to refrain from what is a taghut, and on the other hand to lead a life of servitude with God, before God. Now, at-taghut and ash-shaytan are used synonymously in the Quran. They refer to someone who is arrogant and rebellious before the Almighty, and the opposite of this obviously is humility and modesty. So lexicographers have generally explained worship as something which is an amalgam, an embodiment of humility and civility. And the words they generally use are Aslul Ubudiyya al-Khudu wa tazallul. Aslul Ubudiyya al-Khudu wa tazallul, which means that the essence of worship or the foundation of worship is humility and civility. So if this humility and civility exists in a person with a true comprehension of the mercy, power, providence and wisdom of the Almighty, then it is instrumental in totally humbling a person before Him with His great love and great fear. So remember, this is what is very important. His great love and His great fear, they go hand in hand. He is not all fear, He is not all love, He is love and fear put together. The Quranic words that we often might come across, like khushu or khudu or ikhbat or inaba or khashya, tadarru, qunut, I mean, these are all various words. They are used to depict this very state of a person, his inner state. Now, this of course is something which originates from his inner self and which then embraces his outside, his whole self as well. So when this inner humility manifests itself in the outer form, then various other manifestations result. So zikr, which means remembering God to obtain peace and inner satisfaction. Shukr, which means expressing immense gratitude to God on His abounding favors. And then taqwa, which is fearing God's anger. Ikhlas, which means to devote oneself entirely to God. Tawakkul, which means to trust God. And tafweez, which means submitting oneself and all of one's affairs to God. Taslim or raza, that's another aspect which says that we have to be content at all the decisions of God. So all these are the inner manifestations of this relationship between the worshipped and His worshippers. So when that feeling of humility, it overcomes us, we feel that we are God's, we have to serve God in various capacities and not act as if we have abounding power. So when this happens, then these inner manifestations like zikr and shukr and taqwa and ikhlas, tawakkul, these are attitudes. Tafweez, taslim wa raza, we've all discussed this. These are the attitudes that stem from us, and these are the inner manifestations, as I just said, of this relationship between the worshipped God and His worshippers. In the words of the Quran, this relationship practically manifests itself in some ways, and there is no better or worse than the one that is now being displayed before you, which actually shows these practical manifestations. So remember, we have just seen the inner manifestations, which are taslim wa raza and tawakkul and tashakkur, which means to be thankful to God and to remember God. So these were the inner manifestations. So when these inner manifestations, they come out of ourselves and we express them, then the Quran has actually outlined them in a very pertinent verse, and that is now being displayed before you. It says, "Innama yu'minu bi ayatina allazina iza zukkiru biha kharru sujjadan wa sabbahu bihamdi rabbihim wa hum la yastakbirun. تتجافى جنوبهم عن المضاجع يدعون ربهم خوفا وطمعا ومما رزقناهم ينفقون." So, none profess belief in our revelations except those who, when reminded through them, prostrate themselves in adoration and give glory to their Lord while expressing their gratitude to Him, and are not rebellious to their Lord. Their backs forsake their beds. They pray to their Lord in fear and in hope, and who spend in His way from what we gave them. So clearly you can see that this verse, of course, tells us that kneeling, prostrating ourselves, glorifying Him, the Almighty, praising the Almighty, supplicating before Him, and sacrificing our life and wealth for His liking, all these are the real forms of worship. So, however, once a person is not just mere beliefs, he also has a practical side in this world. So when this worship actually relates to this practical life as well, and in this manner becomes inclusive of obedience. So remember all this that we have just studied, that this kneeling and prostration, prostrating before the Almighty and glorifying Him, etc. So all these are basically the real forms of worship. But of course, since we are not just mere beliefs, we also have a practical side of worship. Now it requires that our outer self also, it prostrates before the Creator, before whom His inner self had prostrated. So His outer self, or our outer selves, should also become subservient to the Creator, to whom our inner selves had become subservient, to the extent that no aspect of life should be left out of it. Also, we can say that we should become true servants of the Almighty in every sense of the word. So the word servant actually today, of course, has a different connotation. People who work for people, they are also called servants. But because of the word, that the Arabic word is Abdullah, Abd. So the Abd is a person who serves the Almighty. So the servant actually here refers to the fact that he is in the service of the Almighty. He is always doing what is due on him as imposed on him by the Almighty. So as far as the Quran is concerned, it says, believers, kneel and prostrate yourselves. So the words are, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu ruk'u wasjudu wa'budu rabbakum waf'alul khayra la'allakum tuflihun. Believers, kneel and prostrate yourselves and become servants of your Lord and do good deeds that you may succeed. So this is something that we have to understand, that this kneeling and this prostration and becoming God's servicemen, these are the outer manifestations of that inner feeling and that inner thing that we call abudiya, or what we call worship. So we now need to just sum up and say that as far as this essence of worship is concerned, it actually starts off with that inner feeling of khudu and tazallul, as lexicographers often say, which means the feeling of civility and humility before the Almighty. It manifests its form in inner forms in the form of zikr and shukr and all these things, and then practically when we go about it, it is in the form of kneeling and prostrating before the Almighty, and also showing that our outer selves have also now bowed down before Him, just as our inner self had earlier on. Now we come to the next important topic, which Ustaz Ghamidi has said, and this can be classified as the definition of religion. So as far as this definition of religion is concerned, we need to also look at it in a perspective, in a background. So when worship prescribes metaphysical and ethical bases for this relationship between a servant and his Lord, between a serviceman and a Lord, it institutes rituals and stipulates bounds and limits to fulfill the requisites of this relationship in this world, then in the terminology of the Quran, this is called religion. Something very important. So I'm just going to reiterate that when this worship, the worship that we have just discussed, which is the essence of religion, when it prescribes metaphysical and ethical basis for this relationship between a servant and his Lord. So this is the first thing. when there are metaphysical and ethical bases for this relationship. We will discuss them, what they are, number one. Secondly, it institutes rituals and stipulates bounds and limits, which is the third thing, to fulfill the requisites of this relationship in this world. Then, in the terminology of the Quran, this is called religion. So it has a metaphysical and ethical basis, and then there are certain rituals and bounds and limits that must fulfill the requisites of this relationship. And when this happens, then the Quran says that this is what we call religion. The form of this religion which the Almighty has explained to mankind through His prophets is called the true religion, or what we can say is Deenul Haqq. And it asks its followers to fully adopt it in their lives and not create any divisions in it. So that is what the Quran has said. And the Quran has actually said this in Surah 42, which is Surah Shura, and verse 13. شَرَعَ لَكُم مِّنَ الدِّينِ مَا وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحًا وَالَّذِي أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ وَمَا وَصَّيْنَا بِهِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَمُوسَى وَعِيسَى أَنْ أَقِيمُوا الدِّينَ وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. He has prescribed for you the same religion which He prescribed for Noah, and which we have now revealed to you, and which we enjoined on Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, with the assertion, adhere to this religion in your lives and do not create any divisions in it. So this verse actually tells us the importance, and it tells us that this is the religion that was given to all the prophets of God. It is not that Prophet Muhammad was given this religion for the first time and hence it was called Islam. No, this was something that, as we will see, and we will go on and also see the Quranic verses say so, that the same religion was given to all the prophets of mankind. And you can clearly see that it starts off with saying that Ma wasabihi Nuha, that Noah was given the same religion as was given to Abraham and to Moses and to Jesus. And before that it is said, Shara lakum, O Prophet, He has prescribed for you the same religion which He prescribed for Noah and which we have now revealed to Abraham and Moses and Jesus. So this actually gives us this very, very important reality that religions of all the prophets has been the same. The Almighty has given the same religion to all His prophets. So therefore, if there has been any discrepancy that we can now see, it is only because the final religion or the final edition of religion which was given to Prophet Muhammad is preserved in its original language that we have today in the form of the Quran. The previous scriptures, of course, they also were true versions of God's religion, but over a period of time, their original language could not be preserved. They could not be, in fact, preserved in their original language, and they were lost to posterity. But when the institution of prophethood was to be terminated, the Almighty sent His final prophet with this final book, and also He made an arrangement that this final book should be preserved so that no more corruption, no more interpolation, or no more deviation can result. The message of God is complete. So this also tells us that as far as previous books are concerned, they also are God's representations of religion. The only thing is that we don't have them in their original language, so they must be read, but read in the light of the Quran. And wherever there is a discrepancy between them and the Quran, then the Quran will prevail over them. But at the same time, if you have practically read the previous scriptures, you'll find that quite a large part of these scriptures is in conformity with the Quran, and hence it is highly advisable that we keep consulting these previous scriptures, and as we go along, we will find that this is such an important area of Quranic studies that a person who studies the Quran without recourse to the previous scriptures, his study would be bereft of many, many important realities. So the next thing that we will now study regarding the framework of Islam is the content or the contents of religion that we can say. So the metaphysical and ethical basis of this worship have been prescribed by religion as al-hikmah. So remember, we just said that this religion has metaphysical and ethical basis. So and that is what we call al-hikmah, and it also stipulates certain rules and laws that we will just see. But as far as these metaphysical and ethical bases are concerned, they are called al-hikmah. And the rituals and the bounds and limits which we just discussed. Remember that worship, that is the inner aspect of religion, the essence of religion. When it prescribes certain boundaries which are rituals which connect us to God, and limits, then what happens is that there is a whole set of laws that come into being, and that is what is called Al-Kitab by the Quran. So remember, Al-Hikmah are the metaphysical and ethical basis of this worship, and Al-Kitab are the rituals and the bounds and limits which are prescribed by religion. And the Quran has actually put them forth in various verses. For example, you can see وَأَنزَلَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَعَلَّمَكَ مَا لَمْ تَكُنْ تَعْلَمْ وَكَانَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكَ عَزِيمًا. And God has revealed to you Al-Kitab and Al-Hikmah, and in this manner taught you what you did not know before. And great is God's favor upon you. And great is God's favor upon you. So, as you can clearly see, Anzalallahu alayka al-kitaba wal hikmah. So al-kitab and al-hikmah, basically they constitute two parts of religion. So in other words, we can say the religion which has been given to all prophets of God had two sections. So one of them is al-hikmah, which of course relates to the metaphysical and ethical basis of religion, which of course is called morality, and the other is the laws and the rituals as well as the limits. So that is called Al-Kitab. So Al-Kitab and Al-Hikmah. In other words, in which this exactly the same content is reflected is also, as now you can see before you, it says وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَمَا أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ يَعِظُكُمْ بِهِ وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. And remember the favors He has bestowed upon you, and the Al-Kitab and Al-Hikmah, which He has revealed to you, of which He instructs you, and keep fearing Allah, and know that He has knowledge of all things. Now, the Quran also refers to Al-Kitab as a Sharia. So remember, Al-Hikmah has the same name. It is called Al-Hikmah, it has just one name. The word Al-Kitab has actually two names. So it has a synonym which is called a Sharia. And this is also something which the Quran has pointed out. So it says, ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَى شَرِيَّةٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْرِ فَاتَّبِعْهَا وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ أَهْوَاءَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Then we set you on a clear Sharia regarding religion. So follow it and do not yield to the desires of men who know not. Now, Al-Hikmah has always remained the same in all revealed religions. However, the Sharia has remained different due to evolution and change in human civilizations and societies. Now, this is a point that you must understand very clearly and grasp it. So we have two divisions of religion. We have two parts of religion. One is Al-Hikmah, the other is Al-Sharia or Al-Kitab. So Al-Sharia and Al-Kitab are the same. As far as Al-Hikmah is concerned, it has always remained the same. There is no change in all the religions. So in Judaism, in Christianity, as Islam later came to be called in their times, in this regard, Al-Hikmah has always remained the same. But the Sharia has changed. It has evolved because of a change in human society. So we know earlier on there were agrarian societies, there were hunters and gatherers, there were people who depended on various other forms of societies, and later on we can see how rural societies were formed, and then urbanization occurred. So all these changes occurred in so many thousands of years, but there was a change keeping in view the nature of these societies in the laws that were given. And it was because of this that the Quran has said, لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. We have ordained a law and assigned a path for each of you. Had God pleased, He could have made of you one community. So a study of divine scriptures shows that the Sharia constitutes the major portion of the Torah, and the Hikmah generally constitutes the Injil. So a very, very interesting point. So religion has two portions. It has two distinct parts. One is Al-Hikmah and one is Al-Sharia. Now, if you look at the revealed scriptures before the Quran, the Torah primarily constitutes the Sharia part, and the Hikmah primarily is something which the Injil is composed of. The Psalms, or as the Quran calls them, Zabur, revealed to David, are hymns which glorify the Almighty and are a forerunner to the Hikmah of the Injil. Now, this is a fact that has to be understood, that hikmah is the thing that Jesus had brought forth in Injil, and that is why he is reported to have said that I have not come to revoke the law but to complete it. So Torah was left bereft of that wisdom or that hikmah, which of course relates to morals and ethics. So it was because of this that Jesus was sent. And the Psalms, as I just said, were hymns to glorify the Almighty, and they were basically a forerunner to the hikmah of the Injil. Now, finally, you can say that the Quran was revealed as a masterpiece of literature comprising both Sharia and hikmah, giving warning to those who evade it and glad tidings to those who follow it. The fact that the Quran is a blend of both Sharia and hikmah is mentioned, in the verses that we have seen earlier on, that it clearly says that these verses clearly say that it is composed of al-hikmah and a Sharia. Now, about the Torah and the Injil, about which we just said that one is composed entirely of law, or a major part of it consists of law, and the other, which is Injil, consists of a major part of it consists of al-hikmah. Now, this is something which the Quran has specified and said that while narrating with one of his dialogues with the Almighty, while narrating one of his dialogues with Prophet Jesus on the Day of Judgment, the Quran has actually said this: وَعَلَّمْتُكَ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَالتَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. وَعَلَّمْتُكَ الْكِتَابَ, in fact it is وَإِذْ عَلَّمْتُكَ الْكِتَابَ, which means, and when I instructed you with the Sharia and the hikmah, that is the Torah and the Injil. So remember, this is what God is asking or telling Jesus. وَإِذْ عَلَّمْتُكَ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَالتَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. So remember when I instructed you with the Sharia and the hikmah, which is the Torah and the Injil. So we can clearly see that here the Quran itself has categorized the Torah to be the law and the Injil to be the wisdom. So to sum it, we can say that al-hikmah basically consists of two things: faith and ethics. Faith and ethics. Hikmah, philosophy of religion, how we relate ourselves metaphysically and ethically to the Almighty. So that is what is called al-hikmah, and it comprises of these two subtopics. So remember, once again, al-hikmah and al-kitab are the two basic contents of religion, and al-kitab is also called a Sharia. So within al-hikmah we have two subtopics, and they are faith and ethics, or beliefs and ethics. And as far as al-kitab is concerned, it consists of 10 topics. Al-kitab and the Sharia are the same. So these are the Sharia of worship rituals, the social Sharia, the political Sharia, the economic Sharia, the Sharia of preaching, the Sharia of jihad, the penal Sharia, the dietary Sharia, Islamic customs and etiquette, oaths and their atonement. And if you recall that we have studied almost all of these topics separately and individually, because we have done a major part of the Sharia or the Al-Kitab that is mentioned in Ustaz Ghamidi's book, and you would recall that these were the topics. So remember that if you can arrange them, then these are the topics that constitute the law part, the law part, or the Sharia part, or the Al-Kitab part. So the important thing, once again, that we have to understand here is that as far as the Quran is concerned, it tells us that if you are to adhere to religion, then this is as far as the contents of religion are concerned. So one is al-hikmah, which consists of faith and ethics or morality, and the other is a Sharia or al-kitab, and it consists of the 10 topics that we just discussed. Now we come to the fourth topic of Ustaz Ghamidi's overall understanding of the framework of Islam, and this is what we call the prophets and messengers. So the envoys of God who brought this religion are called prophets. And a study of the Quran shows that besides being assigned the position of prophethood, which is also called Nubuwah, some of them were assigned the position of messengerhood, which is also called Risala. I would like to once again reiterate that God sent His envoys, His representatives, and they were called prophets or Nabi, or the plural is Anbiya. And another category or another cadre of prophets, a step higher, was the Rasul or the messengers. And they were a category above the prophets. We'll just discuss the difference. But these were the two categories, and they were sent primarily to guide mankind whenever there was a difference in religion. So, the Quran, of course, is something which describes this in detail. But let us see what Ustaz Ghamidi has written when he was discussing or defining the terms of Nubuwah and Risala. So he says, prophethood means that a person, after receiving divine guidance or divine revelation, teaches the truth to his addressees and gives glad tidings of a good fate in the hereafter to those who accept the truth, and warns those among them who reject it that a bad fate awaits them. In the terminology of the Quran, delivering such glad tidings is called bashara. So bashara is to deliver glad tidings, and delivering such warnings is called inzar, which is warning, of course. So basically what a prophet does is that he gives glad tidings. He tells people that, well, if you are going to follow the truth, then you will be rewarded, and if you're not going to do this, and you stick to your own attitude of vice, then you will be taken to task, and that is what we call is inzar. And this is actually described in the Quran in a Quranic verse. It says, كَانَ النَّاسُ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا فَبَعَثَ اللَّهُ النَّبِيِّينَ مُبَشِّرِينَ وَمُنذِرِينَ. Mankind was once one community, then differences arose between them. So God sent forth prophets as bearers of glad tidings and as warners. So you see, basically, as the Quran has said, that this is something which happened in the history, in the course of mankind. When God created Adam, Eve, and the rest of their progeny, they were on a single religion, and they were like one community. So the Quran says, كَانَ النَّاسُ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا. But later on, differences surfaced between them. And these were such grave differences that they were not able to resolve them amongst themselves. So God actually took this initiative, and He sent messengers. He sent prophets, in fact, who were warners and who were bearers of glad tidings. Mubashirin wa munzirin. So Mubashirin and Munzirin. So this is something that we have to understand, that basically this is what is meant by prophethood, that they warn us and they give us glad tidings. Next, Ustaz goes on to define what messengerhood is. So remember, we just discussed that prophethood is, of course, a status occupied by prophets of God, and messengerhood, which is a cadre above prophets. It's like saying that all gods in voice are prophets. It's like saying that every person in an army is a soldier, but there are some soldiers who become brigadiers or generals, which means that they are not ordinary soldiers, but they are a cadre high. So what we can say is that every soldier is a general, but is not a general, but every general is a soldier. So in a similar way, we can say that every Rasul is a prophet, but not every prophet becomes a Rasul, because that's a higher cadre. So as far as this is concerned, we have to understand that messengerhood means that a person is assigned to people, as said, such that he decides their fate through divine sanction, so that if they reject him, he practically enforces the sovereignty of the truth upon them by implementing on them God's judgment in this world. So you see, this is a very, very glaring difference between prophethood and messengerhood. So prophethood or prophets of God, they just delivered God's glad tidings and warnings. But a messenger, he takes a step forward on behalf of God. He actually decides the fate of his nation, the nation to which he is assigned in this world. And the Quran has actually formulated this as a law of Risala, and it has it has clearly mentioned this law at several places, but one place where you can see it being clearly mentioned is here in Surah Yunus, verse 47. It says, وَلِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولٌ فَإِذَا جَاءَ رَسُولُهُمْ قُضِيَ بَيْنَهُمْ بِالْقِسْطِ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. And for each community there is a messenger. Then when the messenger comes, their fate is decided with justice and they are not wronged. So this is what we have to understand, that the Quran, when it says that this is the law of Risala, then it mentions it very clearly, that basically this messenger comes, their fate is decided in this very world. قُضِيَ بَيْنَهُمْ بِالْقِسْطِ. At another instance, the Quran says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يُحَادُّونَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ أُولَٰئِكَ فِي الْأَذَلِّينَ كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَأَغْلِبَنَّ أَنَا وَرُسُلِي إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَوِيٌّ عَزِيزٌ. Indeed, those who are opposing Allah and His Messenger shall be humiliated. The Almighty has ordained, I and my messengers shall always prevail. Indeed, Allah is mighty and powerful. So this is another instance in which this law is stated. Still at another place we see that in accordance with this established practice about his messengers, it was ordained about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and it was said, هُوَ الَّذِي أَرْسَلَ رَسُولَهُ بِالْهُدَى وَدِينِ الْحَقِّ لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ. It is he who has sent his Rasul with guidance and the religion of truth, that he may make it sovereign over all religions of Arabia, even though these idolaters of Arabia may detest this. So the important thing is that messengers of God, they implement God's verdict. They create or set up God's court of justice on the face of this earth. All messengers of God did this, and this was the case with Prophet Muhammad also, who was the final messenger as well. So he also set up a court of justice. And the way this established practice about Risala manifests itself is different. I mean, basically there are different cases, and I'm going to also describe them. So the Almighty selects his messengers so that reward and punishment can be meted out in this world through them before the actual day of judgment. So in other words, before that greater day of judgment, lesser days of judgment, they are set up in the life of every messenger. It becomes a miniature rehearsal. So every lesser day of judgment becomes a miniature rehearsal of what is going to take place on that day of judgment, on the final day of judgment. These messengers are told that if they honor their covenant with God, they will be rewarded in this very world, and if they do not do so, they will be punished in this world. So it's the promise that God has made with the messengers, that they have to follow this. And the result is the very existence of these messengers becomes a sign of God. And it is as if their people can observe God walking on earth and with these messengers and delivering his verdicts. So on the basis of the signs of truths that they have directly observed, they are directed to propagate the truth and present the people with full certainty the very guidance of God, the way they have received it. So they have to faithfully reproduce it before people. And in the terminology of the Quran, this dissemination of the truth, this bearing of witness of the truth before other people of the world or to their assigned addressees is called Shahada. So the word Shahada actually refers to this bearing of witness. And once this is established, it becomes a basis of the judgment of the Almighty, both in this world and in that to come. The Almighty grants dominance to these messengers and punishes those who rejects their message. I mean, they are totally routed. And for this very reason, Prophet Muhammad is also called a Shahid and a Shaheed in the Quran. So both these terms have been used by the Quran for them. So we have the Quran saying, Inna arsalna ilaykum rasula shahidan alaykum kama arsalna ila fir'auna rasula. O Quraysh of Mecca, we have sent forth a messenger to you to bear witness before you, just as earlier we sent a messenger to the Pharaoh. So you see, this is how the Quran has presented it. And this position of Shahada was bestowed besides other messengers upon the progeny of Abraham too. So remember, this Shahada was bestowed individually to certain prophets who became messengers, but it was also bestowed in the collective capacity on the progeny of Abraham, the Zuriyat of Abraham. And for this reason, the Quran has called them, the Zuriyat of Abraham, the progeny of Abraham, to be Ummat-e-Wasat, which means the intermediate group, because this group is between God's messenger and his creation. It is like standing in between them. On the one hand is God and his messenger, and on the other hand are their creation. So they are like a community in between them. And it is asserted that they have been chosen for this position just as the Almighty chooses some great personalities among mankind and grants them the status of a prophet or a messenger. So remember this position of Shahada. You have to once again understand that it's not only bestowed upon individuals who become Rasuls like Abraham and Noah and Moses and Jesus and Muhammad, but it was also bestowed upon the progeny of Abraham, which we know are composed of the Israelites and the Ishmaelites. That is a detail that we'll be discussing later. But the complete progeny of, or the whole entire progeny of Abraham was bestowed with this status of Shahada. And the Quran has actually described this in Surah Hajj in these words, وَجَاهِدُوا فِي اللَّهِ حَقَّ جِهَادِهِ هُوَ اجْتَبَاكُمْ وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ مِلَّةَ أَبِيكُمْ إِبْرَاهِيمَ هُوَ سَمَّاكُمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَفِي هَذَا لِيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ شَهِيدًا عَلَيْكُمْ وَتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ. And struggle for the cause of God in a befitting manner. He has chosen you for this responsibility and laid on you no burdens in the observance of faith. He has chosen you the way he has chosen for you the way of Abraham, your father. He named you Muslims earlier and in this period of the last prophet as well. So you see, clearly it seemed that it was chosen. In the name Muslim was something that was chosen earlier on, and it is something in this last prophet as well. So it has been always the same. The word Muslim was used for the followers of this religion since the very beginning. So he named you Muslims earlier and in this period of last prophet as well. He had chosen you so that the prophet may bear witness before you and that you yourselves may bear witness to this religion before other people of this world. So I'm going to conclude here with this fourth topic of prophets and messengers, with this very important information that these Rasul or these messengers, they decide the fate of their nation in this world. And a lot of verses in which there's bloodshed mentioned, or a lot of punishments are mentioned for people who are to be punished for their denial of the truth. People of the book and the idolaters, they relate to this law of Risala, the law of messengerhood, and they do not relate to today's times, which of course is a very, very different, entirely different time. This is the post-prophetic period in which we are living, and in the prophetic period, in the period of God's messengers, this was a law in which the fate of every nation was decided in the lifetime of that messenger. And they constituted, this decision, this verdict constituted a rehearsal of the greater day of judgment. So that is why we can also call them miniature days of judgment that were made to happen in the lifetime of every messenger. So inshallah we'll continue with this topic in our later sessions, but for now we are going to conclude here, and I'll also invite you to ask any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our first question asks, how should we reconcile the essence of religion being al-ibadah with another verse in the Quran that says, and verily we created life and death to test who among you does good deeds?
You see, that is another thing. The verse actually tells us that this world has been created on the principle of trials and tests and not on the principle of reward and punishment. So the context here is that you're not going to live, if you live a good life, you'll be rewarded in this life for your goodness, and if you live an evil life, then you will be punished for this evil in this world. So that verse is just telling us that what exactly is the nature of life in this world. Is it something in which we will be rewarded immediately for the good that we do, or is it something else? So the Quran has outlined in that verse that this life is basically a place of test in which God has made us pass through various trials, and the ultimate verdict will be given in the hereafter, not in this world, in the hereafter. So that verse is basically describing the pattern of events in this world. Whereas this verse that we just studied actually tells us what basically is the essence of religion, which means that we have to consider ourselves to be humble servicemen of God and not become arrogant and not become independent creatures, so to speak, as Satan became in his own times and his progeny as well. So basically it just tells us the place that from where we should behave. Our behavior should be as humble, down to earth people, and not someone who are arrogant, and not someone who are haughty.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, we study the terms philosophy and metaphysics in literatures as well,
Right.
especially English literature and other literatures. How in Quranic philosophy and metaphysics are they different? How can we differentiate between them?
So you see, metaphysics is something that we call beyond physics, or which is something in which you are connected to a realm which is beyond this world. So physics basically is something which governs or which consists of the laws of this natural world. And metaphysics is something which is beyond this natural world, which is the realm in which we are connected to God, in which we have a certain connection with God. So metaphysics, when we talk about metaphysics in religion, we actually refer to how we are connected to God on the basis of our relationship of being in connection with Him, either through our behaviors or through our attitude. So that behavior and that attitude is something which, when it relates to this world, it becomes the Sharia. And or it becomes something which relates to our own human beings in this horizontal plane. But when we connect ourselves vertically to a being with whom we have to have some connection which is beyond this world, which crosses the boundaries of this world, that is where the Quran, or what we can make you understand by saying, is that this is what we call the metaphysical and the ethical basis. In other words, your belief system, if I can boil it down, your belief system and your moral system, these are the two things which are represented by the metaphysical part that we just discussed. Beliefs and morality. Beliefs and morality. Because you see, belief is something that connects you with God at a plane in which you are, going beyond this world. Similarly, morality is something which connects you with God, in which you are crossing this world and making this effort that, well, this is how God has made us connected to Him, that we have to be morally upright, not only before God, but to other peoples as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Abdurrahman, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum.
Sir, you mentioned about the term service, right? Can you please explain in a little more detail what is meant by service? Because when we hear the word service, we think it is kind of a job or something that we have to do following things.
Of course not. So you see, yeah, that is just that because of the lack of a better word, because generally the word abd or abudiya is translated in the English language as servants of God. So Abdullah is just generally translated as a servant of God. So that gives a different picture. So here basically what is meant is a person who is humble and meek and does not consider himself to be a rival of God, someone who thinks that I am all in all. He acknowledges his place as a person who is humble and meek before the Almighty. So this is what is meant here, that you must recognize what your position is. You are not an independent person who is like self-created, or you can do anything that you want. But the thing is that you must recognize that you are God's creation. You have a very limited power and strength. You must acknowledge that there is someone else who has the ultimate power and strength. So in other words, it keeps us in our place by telling us that our purpose of creation, of course, is that we must understand that we are creatures who have been created, and therefore we must understand our limitations and must not cross those limitations to become arrogant as Satan became. So remember, we studied this verse earlier on, that we have to be humble and we must forsake taghut. So that is the opposite of being humble, that we become so arrogant that we become taghut, that we become Satan personified. So basically, when it is said that you have to be servants of God or you be in service, it basically tells us that our connection with God or our relationship with God is someone or are people that we must realize that we have our limitations, we are humble, we cannot cross those limits, and there is another being to whom we are answerable to, who has created us and who has the status of being called the Almighty. So basically, this verse is meant to describe us or describe to us that we must keep ourselves in check and in the position that we've been created. We are not all in all. God is all in all. But when we try to become all in all, we become taghut. And that is what we should not become. So basically, ubudiyya is the opposite of taghut. as we have just studied. So if we are able to understand this, that this verse is meant to tell us our position. It cuts us to size, so to speak, and it describes us what we should be like. Not become arrogant, not think that we have the absolute and the final word, but be in that humble position that we are creatures of God.
Sir, can I ask a follow-up on that?
Yes, sure.
Sir, usually it's said that arrogance is looking down on others. So in here, the person is not competing and gets caught, right? Maybe somebody scammed him and he is looking down on that person, and he has a valid reason to look down on that person. So he is still, would he be still considered
No,
arrogant?
I mean, you see, when you rise against God, I mean, we are talking about that rebelliousness or the level of taghut in which you are become a rival of God, in which, I mean, like, for example, people start creating God's rivals, which is the biggest thing that you can do, that you create his peers. You say that, well, we have other deities as well. So this is one of the, I mean, this is the ultimate form of arrogance in which you create God's peers. But the arrogance that you're talking about is something which actually is like a mutual behavior between human beings. So no, here the stress is against God, that you have to realize that God has created you as subservient, as individuals who have their limitations, and you must not rise against God. You must not present yourselves to be people as if you have control of everything.
Okay, sir, understood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bisma, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. So my question is the progeny of Hazrat Ibrahim just his direct descendants or all Muslims?
No, his descendants. So remember, they are two, the Israelites and the Ishmaelites. So Abraham had two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. So their descendants are his progeny. So we know from history that the Israelites were given this position of Shahada first. When they did not fulfill it, they were deposed, and then the Ishmaelites were given this position when Prophet Muhammad was born, or he was called to prophethood.
So if there are any descendants still left of them, direct descendants, it's their responsibility, not the entire Muslim race. Is that how
it is? It is their responsibility, but the other people are required to join them in primarily it's their responsibility, because it is the progeny of Abraham who were given this responsibility. But people from other, I mean, you can say lineages, when they accept faith, then they become part of them. It is like they reinforce them. So primarily it's their responsibility, but other people get included in that. So in other words, what we can say is that if they are not fulfilling the responsibility and the rest of them are ready to do that, so they'll not be held answerable. But if they are there and still other people are not doing that, then they will be held answerable.
Oh, can I ask another question? Do we have time?
Yes, please.
From what I understood, Muslim was a term that was to be used for believers from the beginning. So how did the Yehudi become Yehudi and the Christians become Christians?
So that is what the Quran has pointed out, that God gave this name in the time of Abraham to his followers, and instead of accepting it, this name, they actually became the followers of their religion. And we know that earlier on, for example, the Christians were never called the Christians, they were called the Nazarenes. So, and Jesus of Nazareth actually presented to them the teachings of Islam. And I mean, the scriptures don't fully reflect the word Islam, but I'm sure there were parts of it that have been expunged or they have not been preserved, in which this would have been clearly written there. So it was much later that these followers became Jews and Christians, or the followers of a particular sect. Otherwise, I mean, in their own times, Judaism was Islam per se. I mean, what I'm saying is that if you extrapolate Judaism back to the times of Moses and Christianity back to the times of Jesus, then whatever Moses brought to them and whatever Jesus brought to them was nothing but Islam.
Do we know what Judaism means? Yehuda means?
Of course, Yehuda was the son of one of the sons of Jacob.
Oh, right. That's right.
One of the sons of Jacob. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saleem.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, your good self refers to a verse that if God wished, he would have created you as one ummah, so he sent unto you Nabi and Rasul. Kindly explain, does this mean we humans cannot be one ummah?
Okay, so that's a very good question, because the verse that was just cited earlier on basically has been explained by another verse at another place in the Quran, in which the word fakhtalafu appears, that says that mankind was created and then they started to differ with one another. So that is found at another place. So it tells us that when mankind was created, the Almighty gave them that initial knowledge, which of course was given to Adam, and it was passed on from him to his progeny. But then there were differences that arose that could not be resolved amongst themselves. I mean, they started to fight with one another. Blood, was lost and they were killed. So now God thought that messengers and prophets, just as Adam was a messenger, was a prophet, so a further envoy, his representative, is needed, because the nature of those differences had become so pronounced that now individually people would not have been able to settle them. And exactly what happened, or what was the nature of those differences, we don't have details, but we do have details of what happened later on. For example, earlier on when Moses was given the book, so we know how the Jews of those times later on became divided amongst themselves, and those divisions were multiple, one after the other. And then Jesus was sent to actually, once again regroup them and tell them that, well, they have been not discharging their duties properly, and at the same time they have also created divisions among themselves. So if you look at their sects, it will give you a whole saga and a whole account of what had gone wrong from the time of Moses and later on, that had to be set right later on. Similar was the case with Jesus. If you look at the followers of Jesus, they split up into various groups and sects, and they became involved in such great controversies. For example, that Jesus is regarded to be the Son of God, that the Holy Trinity was invented, that people could not resolve this amongst themselves. So the Quran was revealed as the final book in which it had to pronounce from God that there is no such thing as Trinity and that God is one. So these were the major differences that we can think, that are before us, that I can tell you. But if you ask me that what happened in the time of Adam or later on, that actually occasioned that God's prophets and messengers can be sent, we don't have those details. But what we can see, or what we can imagine, is that there must have been very grave differences, like, for example, Trinity that we know of, like, for example, the calf worship incident that was mentioned in the times of Moses, and other things that had to need, that were for whose reformation God's interference was necessary, and He interferes through His messengers.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Sania Amir, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Sir, you have said that the religion has two parts. One is Al-Kitab and one is Al-Hikmah. And Hikmah means morality. And the morality part didn't
morality
ever
and
change.
faith, two things. Hikmah means morality and faith.
Morality and faith. And it remained constant, and it never changed in the times of all prophets. So what about Prophet Adam alayhi salam? We believe that in his times there were marriages between, the brother and the sister, and that's how the mankind expanded.
Yes.
So but in the times of later prophets, it was to have marriages among.
So basically, this part of religion is not morality, it's Sharia. To wed someone belongs to the Sharia part. No, it is, yes, what happens is that whenever every Sharia starts off with some moral thing, and when it is prescribed with certain limits, it becomes Sharia. So basically, the Sharia springs from morality, and morality is something which is let loose, so to speak. But when limits and bounds are prescribed for certain moral values, then they become the Sharia. So basically, marriage is something that is part of the Sharia. If you look at the division of social Sharia, you will see that marriage itself, who are prohibited for marriage. Similarly, what are the requisites of marriage, who you can marry, who you cannot. So this is basically part of the social Sharia of Islam, and that relates to the Sharia part. It originates from, of course, morality, but it actually has to be classified there. So that is why we see that this has evolved. As you have rightly said, initially brothers and sisters, they were allowed to marry, and it was only when the family system became strong that this a prohibition was in place. Initially, the only prohibition was that of marrying your parent. So you could not have married your parent or grandparent. That was the original prohibition. And later on, as families developed and it was essential to safeguard family values, that these prohibitions were incorporated. But as I said, that this is basically part of the Sharia, not the hikmah.
Because incest is considered to be a part of morality. It is very immoral.
So that is what I'm saying, that incest is something that in its nature is called which is immoral. So as I said, every Sharia originates from morality, but when it prescribes certain limits. For example, in morality, we would say that you should not have extramarital relations. But when a person commits an extramarital relation, then how should we deal with such a person? What is the punishment that should be given to such a person? So that becomes part of the Sharia. So whenever morals, they are prescribed certain limits and given certain bounds, then they become the Sharia.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Jazakallah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all of the questions today. Inshallah, see you tomorrow in another session of textual study of the Quran. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.